Здравейте! Аз съм Симеон Василев, председател на фондация GLAS, а вие гледате първият в България Diversity and Inclusion форум Healthy is the New Happy. Изключително съм щастлив, че в следващите 3 дни ще се срещнем с повече от 34 лектори с много богат и разнообразен опит. Ще дискутираме по множество теми, но всички те с фокус приобщаването и многообразието на работното място, както и много по-голямата тема – как да бъдем щастливи на работното място. Организатор на форума са фондация GLAS и фондация Билитис, с които работим заедно за повече приемане на ЛГБТ и хората в България. Ръководим единствения общностен център Rainbow Hub и заедно организираме София Прайд, най-голямото събитие в подкрепа на човешките права в България, което между другото ще се случи тази година физически на 12 юни пред паметника на Съветската армия. Заповядайте, всеки е добре дошъл. Организатор е и бизнес мрежата Work.it, която фондация GLAS създаде преди 5 години. Гордея се да споделя много, че мрежата включва вече 25 компании и партньори, с които всяка година разрастваме обхвата на дейност, чрез събития, обучения и други формати, водещи до една по-приемаща среда за ЛГБТ и хората в България. Ако искате да разберете повече за бизнес мрежата Work.it или как да се включите в нея, може да посетите експозоната ни, някъде там на екрана около вас. В експозоната може да разберете как да се включите в Work.it и да намерите информация за партньорите ни. А говорейки за партньори, ще споделя и кои са те, защото нямаше да се справиме без тях. Това са RG Foundation, Wellness Master Hub, благодаря ми за подкрепата в създаването на програмата, vesi.com, Growth.bg, JobTiger и разбира се прекрасните Jamba. Не на последно място, защото може да се изморите след 2 часа в днешния ден, искам много да благодаря и на екипът на фондация GLAS, на Димитър Пижев и София, без които нямаше въобще да се справим. Малко практични неща. Ако имате нужда от превод, използвайте сцената Translate. Днес с нас са и прекрасните Борис и Ави, които ще ни помагат в следващите 3 дни с жестомимичния превод. Благодаря им много. Задавайте своите въпроси в чата. Мисля, че е много по-лесно да задавате въпрос в чата, отколкото да се изправите пред публика пълна с хора. Така че задавайте въпроси, коментирайте, споделяйте вашия опит. Искаме да чуеме вашето мнение. Ако имате въпроси към лекторите, може да ги задавате. Аз ще се подсигуря да ги попитам. Това е. Време е за начало на ден 1, бъдещето на офиса. Работният свят се промени извънредно много в последната година и въпреки това, ако се вгледаме внимателно, ще забележим, че това е свят, който от твърде дълго плаче за промяна. Всеки иска работа, но иска и нещо друго. Смисъл. Баланс работа и личен живот. 1 година звучи твърде кратко, за да успеем да начертаем прогнози за бъдещето, но именно това ще се опитаме да направим днес. I'm going to switch in English. And I can't think of a better first guest today than Julia Hobsbawm, OBE, best-selling writer, chair of Demos Workshops Commission, and the author of the recent report, The Nowhere Office. Julia, we are delighted to have you with us here today for the first Diversity and Inclusion Forum in Bulgaria.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. It's an honor.
Thank you. Now, Julia, in the Nowhere Office, you claim that as we return to the post-pandemic working life, fixed time and place will no longer be the defining pillars of work for the traditional office workers, with the pandemic having proved that going back full-time to an office may be neither productive economically or culturally desirable. We are already seeing this happening with some of the big tech companies allowing most staff to continue remote work indefinitely. Twitter, for example, I've read the other day, has said it will allow most of its employees to work from home permanently. And to be honest, I think none of us have it all figured out. But Julia, let's hear your suggestion of this radical alternative taking place when the lockdown ends for good. Will there be a full return to office life?
Well, it's a very dynamic situation. The truth is, I call my project the Nowhere Office because we are in the middle of nowhere. We're in a space between what was and what is going to be. There's no doubt that something like a third of corporations around the world are entertaining seriously the idea of hybrid working, and that this is unlikely to mean that there is a complete return 9 to 5. And of course, for the last 10 or 15 years, technology has allowed people to be mobile, just not to be fully remote. And also over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a rise in the debate and policies actively in the workplace around well-being. And so there's a connection between the discussion around where and when we work and what we feel about ourselves in the workplace. The big challenge is going to be community, collaboration, brand identity, and productivity. We cannot pretend that it isn't essential to maintain productivity and output, even if that's in a creative industry or a service sector. So there are challenges ahead, but it is, I think, a very interesting and exciting moment that those of us that want to see change in society, which includes the workplace, I think this is a moment for us to be cautiously optimistic.
I like that, cautiously optimistic. But in the paper, you're also saying that we should be campaigning for a new way to pay for time spent working and focus on social health in the workplace. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes, I can't hear you very well, Simeon, just so you know. I think you wanted to talk about campaigning. Could you actually repeat the question? I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear you properly.
Absolutely, no worries. Can you hear me now?
A little bit, yes.
All right. We should be campaigning for a new way to pay for time spent working and focus on social health in the workplace. And I
Yeah.
wanted you to tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, so what I call social health is that in the way that we have an understanding of physical and mental health that is really measured, if you like, certainly our physical health is measured all the time, isn't it, with our calories and our carbohydrates and how many steps we walk. And mental health is very well understood to be measured by some simple metrics like how well slept we are and how well supported we are by systems. What is social health? Well, social health is everything about the way we connect and communicate, which is now very complicated with a number of different computers and platforms and always on and systems and face-to-face juggling with this mediated technology. And so social health, in order for us to be able to cut through the complexity of the digital environment, we need to, in fact, have an understanding of it. We need to have policies around it. We need to talk about it. I think that the well-being era pre-pandemic will need to be changed post-pandemic. We will need to focus less on loose definitions of well-being and mental health and be more specific about, are we able at work to understand each other very well about what needs to be done? Are we going to be respecting each other's differences and diversity and hear each other's different points of view? And is our employer responsible for creating an environment that supports that? I feel that the discussion around well-being pre-pandemic has really been actually quite vague, and we now need to take this opportunity to move forward. Inclusion and equality is a form of social health. It is a form of saying, I bring what I believe and think into the workplace, and the employer saying, well, that's great, but that's nothing to do with the work, or that's great, that's going to help us do our work differently. So I'd really like a more aligned discussion to develop between this vague idea of well-being and the idea that in the workplace we want to work well as be well.
It was also a challenge for us when we were organizing this forum. Companies were asking us why well-being is in the diversity and inclusion, and thank you so much for actually pointing out why it is there, and it is vital for any workplace to be prosperous and for the employees. I was really fascinated to also read in the report, and I really love that part, about the sick buildings, that
Yes.
the buildings are actually maybe making us sick, and that is leading to the nowhere office. So how do you, in your point of view, how is this hybrid new office space going to look like?
Well, I should say that the paper I published is now going to be a book, and there's also a podcast called The Nowhere Office if people are interested in hearing more about these issues. And Simeon, perhaps you will come on onto our podcast and talk about how it is for the LGBT community in Bulgaria. That would be really interesting. I think we have to think and behave differently, and that includes how we behave around place. So the last 50 years has seen essentially a single siloed model of work which has been based around a place you go to and sit in, and the architecture within that office has changed from the floor to the cubicle back to open plan, but it's always been around an idea of presenteeism, of time not belonging to anybody but the worker, the employer. And of course, the mobile era and the needs of our lives have meant that we need to reconstruct where we spend our time working. And co-working spaces have emerged in the last 8 to 10 years, along with platforms and digital cloud-based technology that was put to the test with the pandemic, where we became briefly fully remote. Well, fully remote is problematic for social health. It's problematic because you need to see and experience other people's body language, and you cannot do everything fully remote. And I'm alarmed at the movement by some tech advocates to say we never need to go back to an office again. But I'm equally alarmed by some employers, especially the financial institutions, Goldman Sachs in particular, saying you must come back to work full time. I don't want to say that's not right for Goldman Sachs, that's not my business, but I do think that the idea that the only way to work is by coming into a single place of work all at the same time is definitely over. And the point about sick buildings is also the point about social health, which is all the data globally shows that work has been unhealthy, unproductive, stagnant productivity almost in every single country, and very, very high stress levels. The World Health Organization, before the pandemic, quoted stress as the single biggest epidemic in the world. And in the European Union, 60% of working days were lost to stress. And in my country, the UK, which is of course now no longer part of Europe, 17.9 million working days a year are lost to stress. So there's a relationship between where we work, why we work, how we work, when we work, and feeling great about what we're doing and why. And that is to do as much as anything else, I believe, as with identity. Not necessarily personal identity in isolation from workplace identity, but a marriage between the two. If you come to work and feel understood and seen and believed and supported, and you in turn are invited to give your strengths, not your weaknesses, not a well-being culture that says, bring your biggest vulnerable self to work, that's okay. I want to flip the language to say, we want you to feel strong about yourself when you come to work. So I'd like to change the discourse a little bit.
I love it. I think we are in this together, changing the discourse when it comes to the workplace. And congratulations about the book, actually. That's going to be, I'm sure,
Thank you so much.
amazing. I have a few two final questions. One is you're also mentioning in the Nowhere Office report, which, as you mentioned, people can follow the podcast on Spotify and on the other channels. You're also talking about our generation, the generation Gen Z or Gen Y. Is our generation going to be the generation working from nowhere, or rather working from everywhere?
Very good question. Well, I'm obviously fantastically flattered that you include me in your generation because I'm nearly 57 years old, so I'm definitely not Generation Y
You
or
included.
Z. But I have lots of children, and they all are. I think we are all Generation Mobile, which means that data shows that really above pay, we pride mobility and flexibility. The Nowhere Office ultimately, I think, will be about a partnership, a marriage, an alliance between how we live and where we live in our personal lives and what we do for work. And there will be much more of a blend. There will, I think, be places that we go to, and there's a lot of evidence that young people actually want the community and the collaboration of an office environment more than my generation. You know, I like to, as we say in England, you know, potter about my kitchen or go for a walk or so on and so forth. I don't need to learn in quite the same way as young people. There's nothing like learning from elders and colleagues. So I think there are a number of different options. One option is that there will be for each workplace a sort of standardization that says, you know, we don't work from home on a Monday and a Friday and we come in on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. For others, it will be project-based. For others, it will be design your own team-based alliance. And technology platforms will evolve to support these different iterations. So there will not be a one size fits all, but I very, very much doubt that there will be a meaningful return to buildings, which of course will radically affect the economy. It will radically affect cities. So none of this is going to be completely easy or completely comfortable or completely without side effect. But you know, that's what change is. Change is disruptive. And in business, disruption is often what makes you win in the end.
You also just mentioned technology, and this is going to be the final question. What do you think the role of technology will be in after the Zoom boom and after this year of constant Zoom talks and Google Meet talks and all these meetings?
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit alarmed that Zoom has invested in virtual reality headsets. You know, I think that we don't really need more technology to enhance our human self. The Zoom, let's call it Zoom. I appreciate there are other technologies and Google Meets and Skypes and whatever, but Zoom is a shorthand. This is pretty good. I don't think I need to have even more enhancement. So technology's always got a tension between trying to genuinely help bring people together from a remote perspective, a cloud-based sharing platform or even email, and kind of spinning off into wanting to really make money just out of inventions that tell us we need things that we don't really need. Ultimately, what we need, and I've written about this a lot, is to keep things simple, to reflect the working memory, the cognitive limit, the emotional capacity of the human brain. Once technology starts to deviate from that and make things too complicated, it doesn't do us any favors. That said, technology has saved the day in the pandemic. And I do think there's a new generation of sharing platforms and apps based more around a human-based approach to how we work and socialize rather than a technology-designed algorithm base. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Thank you. And on that note, with this caution optimism of yours, which I very much like, it was our pleasure to start with you today to launch the first Diversity and Inclusion Forum in
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you, and keep up the fantastic work.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your day in London. And we are staying on the same geographical level, I should say, in the UK, where our next speaker is Robert Hicks. He's also the HR director of Reward Gateway. And Reward Gateway is actually one of our main corporate partners when it comes to the Work It Out platform. And with them, through the years, we've managed to reach a lot of success, a lot of different successes. And Reward Gateway Foundation is actually one of the partners of today's forum. And it's always our pleasure to work with them, and it's been a very fruitful partnership so long. So, do we have Robert? Not yet. All right. We will be resuming back shortly. Докато чакаме Робърт да се включи в първия Diversity and Inclusion Forum, който гледате в момента, тук при мен вече е Кристиан Ичев, Junior Associate at Камбуров and Partners, който ще ни поговори малко повече за законовите рамки на работата от разстояние. Кристиан, добре дошъл, радваме се, че си с нас днес тук.
Добре заварил, приятно ми е.
Повядай тук, мисля, че е окей. Да.
Здравейте на всички от мен. Аз съм Кристиян. Първо бих искал да благодаря на Симеон за това събитие, за неговата организация и за това, че е поканил човек от нашата кантора. Както той спомена...
малко по-насам, да?
Както той спомена, темата на моята презентация е правни аспекти и проблеми на работата от разстояние. Преди да преминем по същество по темата, бих искал да представя и организацията, която всъщност представлявам. Това е адвокатско дружество Камбуров и съдружници, една от първите и най-разпознаваеми кантори на българския пазар за правни услуги. Ние имаме отделна правна практика, която се занимава с въпросите на трудовото право